It started like any other night in late-night television. Bright lights, a packed studio, polished jokes, and the effortless charisma of Jimmy Kimmel warming up his audience. The energy in the room was electric, as fans eagerly awaited one of Hollywood's most revered figures, Angelina Jolie, known not just for her award-winning roles and stunning red carpet appearances, but for her deep humanitarian work and advocacy on behalf of refugees. Jolie brought with her a quiet but undeniable gravitas. As she entered the studio, applause roared, cameras rolled, and everything seemed in place for a typical celebrity interview. But what neither the audience nor Jolie herself could have known was that this particular appearance would unravel into one of the most talked about, dissected, and controversial moments in recent late-night history. What began as a promotional segment for her latest film turned into a confrontation that peeled back the glossy veneer of television entertainment and revealed the uncomfortable truths simmering underneath. From the moment she took her seat across from Kimmel, something felt off. The smiles were there, the pleasantries exchanged. But behind the glassy eyes and scripted charm was a host seemingly emboldened by his producers to challenge, perhaps even corner, a guest who had long stepped outside the comfortable bounds of Hollywood's expectations. As the interview kicked off, Kimmel began with the usual flattery. "You look incredible, Angelina," he quipped, flashing his signature smile. Jolie returned the courtesy with a gracious nod, prepared to discuss her film and perhaps share a few anecdotes. But within minutes, the tone shifted. Kimmel, referencing recent headlines, brought up her humanitarian work, not to praise it, but to question its appropriateness. "Some people think you've gotten a little too political," he said, trying to keep the delivery light though. His words cut like barbed wire. There was a visible flicker in Jolie's demeanor, not defensive, but alert. She straightened slightly, her hands still calmly folded in her lap. "It's not political to care about human rights," she replied, her tone even but resolute. What followed was not a heated debate, not a shouting match, but something more unsettling. A slow, methodical unraveling of an interview format that rarely tolerates authenticity beyond the promotional. Kimmel pressed again, implying that her recent advocacy, particularly involving international issues, was stirring too much controversy for someone in her position. "Don't you think it's better to stick to what you know?" The acting thing. The moment those words left his mouth, the temperature in the studio seemed to drop. Audience members shifted in their seats. Jolie's jaw tensed, but her voice remained poised. "I've been working with the UN for over a decade. Jimmy, I've seen the inside of refugee camps, held children dying of preventable diseases, spoken with survivors of war. Are you suggesting I ignore those experiences too? Stay within some arbitrary comfort zone?" As the cameras continued rolling, it became clear to everyone on stage and off that this was no longer just a celebrity interview. It had transformed into a philosophical and ethical reckoning, and Jolie was not about to let the moment slip away. Kimmel tried to recover, backtracking awkwardly, insisting that he didn't mean to question her passion. But the damage was done. Jolie leaned in, her gaze steady. "So, when male actors like George Clooney speak about Sudan, or Leonardo DiCaprio talks about climate change, they're hailed as activists. When I do it, I'm told to stay in my lane." The accusation wasn't shrill, it was measured. Devastating. Kimmel, clearly flustered, attempted to shift topics. "Let's talk about your movie," he said, grasping at the cue cards like a lifeline. But Jolie didn't budge. "No, Jimmy, you brought this up. You questioned my right to speak. We're going to talk about that." The crowd, normally accustomed to bursts of laughter and applause signs, sat in stunned silence. Even the band, typically providing light background riffs, had gone still. Jolie then delivered what would later be described by media outlets as a mic drop monologue, dissecting how women in entertainment are frequently expected to be agreeable, decorative, unthreatening. "You're not just telling me to stay quiet," she said. "You're sending a message to every young woman watching this: be careful how loud you get. Don't challenge too much. Smile more, be less." As Jolie's words echoed through the studio, Kimmel's demeanor shifted from playful to panicked. He chuckled nervously, a practiced move that usually softened any tension on set. But the laughter sounded hollow this time. Jolie wasn't laughing, and neither was the audience. What had been orchestrated as a cheeky provocation by producers hoping to manufacture a viral moment had instead exposed something raw, real, and profoundly uncomfortable. "I've dealt with warlords," Jolie said quietly. "I've sat across from government officials who didn't want me in the room. Do you think a talk show host trying to undermine me is going to intimidate me?" The room held its breath. Kimmel, visibly sweating, muttered something about just trying to have a conversation, but it was too late. The power had shifted. Jolie, without raising her voice, had turned a scripted media ambush into a clinic on standing one's ground. She had taken control of the narrative, not through volume or aggression, but through clarity and conviction. At that point, multiple audience members began recording on their phones. Despite posted signs forbidding it, they knew they were witnessing something unusual, something that didn't happen on television anymore. Not in a world of safe interviews and controlled narratives. This wasn't content. It was confrontation. And Jolie wasn't just defending herself. She was defending a principle. As the exchange dragged on, Kimmel's attempts to pivot grew increasingly desperate. He stumbled over words, consulted his cards, looked helplessly toward the crew. But Jolie wasn't giving him a way out. "You said my work is too political," she reminded him. "You questioned its legitimacy. So stand by that or admit you were wrong." It was a challenge he couldn't meet. "Maybe I phrased things poorly," he finally conceded, voice barely above a whisper. Jolie nodded, but didn't let him off the hook. "Poor phrasing suggests a mistake," she said. This felt planned. Intentional. At that point, it was clear to everyone watching both in the studio and later online that this was more than just a flubbed interview. It was a moment of reckoning for a medium that has long commodified celebrity personalities while resisting the deeper complexities those people might carry. Jolie had come prepared to speak about more than her film. And Kimmel, caught off guard, had exposed a double standard that Hollywood rarely acknowledges publicly. In the aftermath, the show's producers reportedly considered cutting the segment entirely. But it was too late. Clips had already gone viral. The public, starved for moments of truth amid the noise of PR, clung to Jolie's composure, her refusal to shrink, and her precise dismantling of the very system that tried to belittle her. In the days that followed, headlines exploded. Angelina Jolie schools Jimmy Kimmel on live TV, a masterclass in speaking truth to power. When Hollywood's PR machine failed to contain the truth, analysts, pundits, activists, and fellow celebrities weighed in, many praising Jolie's restraint and courage. A few criticized her for being too intense or taking things too seriously. But those voices were drowned out by the overwhelming respect from viewers who saw in her a rare kind of integrity. Jolie herself did not issue a statement. She didn't need to. The footage spoke for itself. Meanwhile, Kimmel's team released a brief comment acknowledging that the segment did not go as planned. But insiders revealed that producers were in disarray, unsure whether to apologize, clarify, or just ride out the storm. One source even said, "We didn't expect her to push back like that," which, perhaps, was the most telling admission of all, that even in 2025, a woman using her platform with conviction and intelligence is still considered surprising, still regarded as a disruption rather than an asset. Jolie's moment on that stage was more than a confrontation. It was a rejection of the subtle censorship embedded in modern media. The idea that celebrities, especially women, should entertain but never challenge, charm but never confront, smile but never speak too boldly. In that studio, before millions of viewers, she proved that the most powerful voice isn't always the loudest, it's the one that refuses to bend. But by this point, Jimmy Kimmel's voice had lost all authority. His usual charm and effortless control over the room had crumbled, and all that remained was a man visibly shrinking in his own seat. Across from him, Angelina Jolie stood literally and metaphorically towering in composure and purpose. Her voice carried a clear, unwavering intensity as she looked down at him and delivered the final dismantling blows. "What's not fair, Jimmy," she said, "is using your platform to try to silence women who speak uncomfortable truths. What's not fair is pretending that entertainment can't handle serious conversations while you make jokes about people's pain. What's not fair is the double standard that calls male actors brave statesmen when they speak about the world, but dismisses women as too political when we do the same." The words hit the studio like a hammer, leaving no space for rebuttal. And then, with a quiet authority that completely changed the energy of the room, she stood up from her chair. The movement was simple, but the symbolism was seismic. This wasn't just a guest walking out. It was a woman rejecting an entire framework built to keep her boxed in, looking down at him from her full height. Jolie continued, her voice now echoing through the silent studio with crystalline clarity. "But you know what the real tragedy is?" she asked, not waiting for a reply. "You had an opportunity tonight. You could have used your platform to talk about the refugee crisis, millions of people displaced by war, persecution, and poverty. You could have educated your audience. But instead, you chose to make this about me. You chose to try and diminish me for caring too much." Fallon looked up at her, slumped in his chair, the lines on his face deepening with every word. "Angelina, please, sit down. We can start over." His voice was almost pleading now, but she didn't hesitate. "No, Jimmy," she said firmly, "we can't start over, because this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was calculated. You came into this interview with an agenda. One, your producers clearly helped craft. That agenda was to make me look like the problem for giving a damn about human suffering. Well, congratulations. You accomplished something tonight. Just not what you intended." The audience sat frozen. Some with mouths slightly open, others shaking their heads, overwhelmed by the rawness of what they were witnessing. "Shown everyone watching," Jolie continued, her voice unwavering. "Exactly what it looks like when someone in power tries to shut down a voice that doesn't fit neatly into the entertainment mold. You've demonstrated the very double standards that women have to navigate every day, and you've proved that when we step outside of being agreeable, decorative, quiet, were suddenly too much. Fallon opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. He looked like a man cornered by his own choices. Jolie gave him one last opening, her tone challenging but calm. "That's not what this was about," he muttered. "Then what was it about, Jimmy?" she shot back. "Explain it to me. Explain it to your audience. Tell us all what this was supposed to accomplish." But he couldn't. The silence stretched thin and tight like a wire ready to snap. Jolie didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply stood there, composed and certain, as Fallon visibly wrestled with the wreckage of his failed ambush. "I thought so," she said quietly, her voice carrying more weight than any shout ever could. "There's no good explanation. There's no excuse for trying to shame someone for advocating for human rights. There's no justification for trying to push someone into a corner for caring about real people." As she moved toward the edge of the stage, she turned back one final time, her voice like a final stamp on the moment. "You know, Jimmy, I've been in war zones where journalists risk their lives to tell the truth. I've worked with people who use media to shine light on injustice, to give voice to those who have none. And then there's this, a platform that could reach millions, used instead to try to silence someone for caring too much." That final line wasn't shouted. It wasn't even bitter. It was delivered with surgical precision, and it hit just as hard as anything she'd said all night. "The saddest part," she added, "is that you'll probably edit this down, try to make it look like something it wasn't. But the people in this room, your crew, your audience, they'll know the truth. They saw it. They'll remember that when you had the choice to elevate an important conversation, you chose to tear someone down instead." Fallon sat still, his shoulders sagging, his face a portrait of defeat. His crew didn't move. The audience began to murmur among themselves, the spell of silence finally breaking as they tried to process what they had just witnessed. "I came here to talk about my new film," Jolie said, her voice calmer now, but still steely, "and the work I do with refugees. I'm sorry your audience didn't get to hear about either of those things because you were more interested in creating a moment than in having a meaningful conversation." With that, she walked off the stage. No fanfare, no final look, just quiet, confident exit, leaving behind a talk show host alone under the hot lights of a studio that had just become the scene of a reckoning. The host who had tried to diminish her had instead diminished himself, proving, with devastating clarity, every single point she'd made about how women are treated when they dare to speak up. The cameras were still rolling, but there was nothing left to say. Fallon, visibly shaken, looked around for direction, for a script, for any scrap of dignity to grab onto, but none came. And in that final shot, the world saw it all. A rare moment in which the spotlight shifted, not to dazzle or entertain, but to expose. What viewers had just witnessed wasn't just another viral late-night clip, it was history. So there you have it. The night Angelina Jolie didn't just walk off a talk show, she walked into a moment of cultural confrontation that laid bare the uncomfortable truths Hollywood still struggles to acknowledge. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to, because the strength of her conviction spoke louder than any scripted punchline. What do you think about how she handled that situation? Was she right to call out the hypocrisy and walk off? Or do you think Fallon's team had fair intentions but executed poorly? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more deep stories like this one, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell wheel. See you in the next one.